Are you falling for propaganda? Propaganda is information of a biased or misleading nature used to promote a political cause or a point of view. I quite like Britannica's definition as well. Propaganda, the dissemination of information, facts, arguments, rumours, half-truths or lies to influence public opinion. It is often conveyed through mass media. I will say, as we start to talk about this, I might bring up some uncomfortable feelings in this video with the things that we're talking about, because politics can provoke a lot of reactions. On my channel before, I've talked about the importance of sitting with discomfort, sitting with uncomfortable feelings instead of just reacting. If you feel uncomfortable during this video, sit with that discomfort instead of lashing out. I want this to be a really thoughtful, nuanced discussion about propaganda, so proceed at your own risk. Let's talk about some of the hallmarks of propaganda. It will be something that does provoke a reaction within you, like we just talked about. It's going to be something quite emotional. It's important to respond and not react, and this is something that I am still working on, because depending on how much your emotions are involved, how you feel about a topic, it's very easy to just react instinctively to something as opposed to taking a second to respond more thoughtfully. With propaganda, it's going to provoke an emotional reaction. And it might be a bad one if you can see that that is propaganda, but if you're believing the propaganda, it might be a positive reaction. You might be responding positively to something. And that is because propaganda is designed specifically to target you. It wants to appeal to you. It wants to give you a story of belonging, whether that is to do with national belonging, appealing to a particular identity, and it's giving you a role to play, and it's also casting someone else as the other, and you are on the right side or the correct side of whatever this propaganda is. This is all going to sound quite nebulous, but if we use two examples that I used in the thumbnail for this video, the "Your country needs you" poster and also the "We can do it" poster, they are provoking, if we analyze them, positive feelings. In one, you are being spoken to directly with the US Army needs you, or there's also a British version that features Lord Kitchener. You're being spoken to directly, and in the other one, the inclusive pronoun we is including you in a group of people. It's giving you an identity and a sense of belonging. It's also giving you, as we discussed, a role to play. It's saying, we need you to join the army, or we need you to join this effort. One thing to remember with propaganda is that if you think that you will never fall for it, or that you can spot it, you're probably already falling for it now. So the question, are you falling for propaganda? The simple answer is probably yes. Obviously, this is a whole video dedicated to this topic, so we're going to get more in depth in terms of the nuances of that question. But are you falling for propaganda? Yes, and that is because it's designed to appeal to you. It is supposed to be something that draws you in, something that you want to believe. And so one of the ways to combat it, which we're going to talk about, but one of the ways is to be aware of it, to be very intentional when you are consuming media, because the people who design propaganda, they are being very intentional about what they want you to see. So they are putting a lot of thought into this so that it appeals to you. So you also need to put a lot of thought into the way that you consume media and not just mindlessly believe everything you see or accept everything you see. It's kind of similar to how if you are a bad friend, you may not consider how you're a bad friend, right? But if you have some awareness of, oh my gosh, I'm being a bad friend here, I'm not replying quickly enough, or I haven't asked how they're doing, I'm sort of just unloading about my day. If you have some awareness about what you're doing, some self-awareness, that probably means that you're not that much of a bad friend, because you are at least acknowledging what you're doing and you're able to then correct your behavior. In terms of the way we consume media, media literacy is the ability to critically analyze stories presented in the mass media and to determine their accuracy or credibility. And that's the aim of this video. Are you falling for propaganda? The aim is to try and encourage you to think critically when you're engaging with media, particularly with propaganda, because it's designed specifically to appeal to you. So media literacy is being able to spot that and being aware of that. Propaganda is the more or less systematic effort. So it's systematic, it's deliberate and intentional. You also need to be intentional with the way that you consume this media. Propaganda is the more or less systematic effort to manipulate other people's beliefs, attitudes, or actions by means of symbols. So words, gestures, banners, insignia,
monuments, music, clothing, hairstyles, designs on coins and postage stamps, and so forth.
The postage stamp example is interesting. See, I want to say how many of you stand automatically for the national anthem, and I just want to leave that with you. But I also am aware that saying that kind of thing, I have a very specific viewer that I'm trying to attract, and I don't want to rile anyone who's not that specific viewer, and we're only like 9 minutes in. Well, I know I shouldn't care, but I really want this video to reach like the thoughtful people that I'm trying to reach and not just the reactive people. So if we think about the use of symbols, this kind of links to Roland Barthes and semiotics, which is about the sign, the signifier, and the signified. I have a degree in English literature. This was like what we learned in our first year when we were learning about different theory. We're going to come back to that, so have that in your mind. Deliberateness and a relatively heavy emphasis on manipulation distinguish propaganda from casual conversation or the free and easy exchange of ideas. Propagandists have a specified goal or set of goals. To achieve these, they deliberately select facts, arguments, and displays of symbols and present them in ways they think will have the most effect. To maximize effect, they may omit or distort pertinent facts or simply lie, and they may try to divert the attention of the reactors, the people they're trying to sway, from everything but their own propaganda. So you may have heard about whataboutism. This is a propaganda tactic. It is trying to keep people focused on the propaganda, try to divert the attention of reactors from everything but the propaganda. Whataboutism, it's saying everyone is bad, so there's kind of no point in you getting annoyed at me because everything is bad. Definitely a bad faith tactic, and we talked about good or bad faith arguments in my last video, so I will link that if you want to check that out. Soviet propagandists during the Cold War were trained in a tactic that their Western interlocutors nicknamed whataboutism. Any criticism of the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, martial law in Poland, imprisonment of dissidents, censorship, was met with a "what about?" apartheid South Africa, jailed trade unionists. There are two kinds of propaganda if we think about the way that they're viewed. There's overt propaganda and covert propaganda. Overt propaganda is where propagandists are known to their reactors. An example of overt propaganda would be the tweet that I used in the thumbnail for this video. I will link the tweet below so you can go look at it and analyze it in your own way, because that's the point of this video. We're trying to think critically and examine media and not just react impulsively. That video that is linked in the tweet that I used for the thumbnail is an example of overt propaganda. Overt propaganda is where the propagandists, the people producing the propaganda, are known to the reactors. So if you are a target of propaganda, if you are the one consuming the propaganda, you are a reactor. And this is based on Britannica's summary of propaganda, which I will link in the description. All of the links for the references that I use in this video will be in the description. There's also covert propaganda, which is where it is not known to the general public where specifically this message is coming from, who this message is coming from. It could be that politicians or journalists, editors have been bribed or swayed to produce a particular piece or to have a particular piece of legislation. If we're talking about politicians, it can be covert if you don't know who has bribed the politician. The politician is a front, and we're going to talk about scapegoats, Trojan horse later in the video, because that also comes into it in terms of the tactics of propaganda and how propagandists work. While it's important to look at what propaganda is, also important to look at what propaganda is not. So if we talk briefly about brainwashing and advertising, these are linked to propaganda, but they are not propaganda. Similarly, propaganda is distinct from education, and if we look at the differences between the two, that will help us highlight why education is so important, and that's what this video is trying to do. It's trying to give you all of the information and then you can make your own mind up about it. Propaganda is deliberately selective, propaganda is manipulative, whereas education presents various sides to an issue, and the aim of education is to give you the tools so that you are able to examine things yourself, analyze things for yourself, and make your own mind up about it using critical analysis, whereas propaganda, the goal is definitely not to present all sides. And if we talk briefly about nationalism, and this is a pretty benign example, this poster that I used in the thumbnail, whoever has made a piece of propaganda can leverage the nationalism that is implied in their piece of propaganda. And if you say, this is propaganda, I don't believe in it, or you start questioning it, you can then be called out on that, and people can say that you're not patriotic, you don't believe in your country. It's a tool to also use against dissidents as well as use against the population of reactors, the people that the propagandists are trying to target. I mentioned brainwashing and advertising. Brainwashing is distinct from propaganda because propaganda is widespread in terms of over the media, whereas brainwashing, it's normally done in person and physically. So you could brainwash someone through torture, through sleep deprivation, through overwork. Brainwashing is more about intensive political indoctrination. So couple those physical things like the lack of sleep, denial of sleep, torture, with psychological elements like solitary confinement or humiliation in front of other people, threats, really harsh interrogations. If you take those psychological elements and pair them with the physical elements, you then are priming someone to be brainwashed. So we can see that that is somewhat distinct from propaganda. And then advertising, while it has some similarities, particularly in the distribution through mass media, advertising has mainly commercial connotations. So that makes it distinct from propaganda, which has often got political connotations like nationalism that we talked about. However, there can be some overlap with advertising and propaganda. Political candidates, party programs, and positions on political issues may be packaged and marketed by advertising firms, like a political advert as a mix of advertising, because it's in the name and it's an advert, but also propaganda. This is something trying to portray a candidate, a political candidate, in a specific light. How does propaganda work? This has been threaded throughout the video so far, but I wanted to do a section on it as well. Propaganda works by preying on your good nature. We talked about how it gives you a role to play. It maybe helps you feel a sense of belonging, a sense of togetherness with your fellow countrymen, but it also preys on your good nature because maybe you have a worldview that says that people are generally good. And I would say that yes, there are plenty of examples that you can find, both big examples throughout history, but also things in your own life, I'm sure, that you can think of examples where people are very kind and just good, like at their heart, they're good. But propaganda takes advantage of that if you have that naive worldview. And I did originally, the thumbnail for this video was going to be something like this, because I think that naivety is a really key part in terms of believing propaganda or not thinking that someone is deliberate with their propaganda, when it really is, as we've been talking about, a very deliberate thing to create propaganda. You have to understand the people that you're targeting. You're kind of marketing a political message to them through propaganda. So it is always a deliberate thing. And that's why you can't be naive when you're consuming media, because the people who are making this propaganda, they want you to believe it, and they are definitely not being naive about this. They are being very deliberate. We kind of touched on this in my last video when we talked about good and bad faith arguments. You can be engaging with the world in good faith and think that everything is fine, but there will be plenty of bad actors out there who are engaging in bad faith, and they're counting on the fact that you won't see it or you won't believe it because you're engaging only in good faith. And this is kind of similar to, we're not going to talk about this in this video, but I could talk about it because it's a big topic. It's kind of similar to dog whistles. If you are engaging in good faith, you probably won't spot dog whistles because they're designed to be very, very subtle and only appeal to a specific group of people who will recognize them for what they are. And if you're engaging only in good faith, you're going to miss those dog whistles, and you're even going to, when they're brought to your attention, you're even going to say, oh no, like you're being dramatic, you're overreacting, like they didn't mean it like that. But it's like, no, these people are counting on, if they are in bad faith using dog whistles, for example, they are counting on you brushing it aside, thinking it's not a big deal. Contemporary propagandists with money and imagination can use a very wide range of signs, symbols, and media to convey their messages. Signs are simply stimuli. These improve sounds such as words, music, or a 21 gun salute. Gestures, a military salute, structures, a monument, a building, or visual signs like a poster, a flag, a picket sign, a badge, printed page. A symbol is a sign having a particular meaning for any given reader. And this is where I brought up Roland Barthes and semiotics earlier, because I think that can just be quite an interesting point. In semiotic theory, signs consist of one, a signifier, which is a word, a sound, like we were just talking about with those list of things that can be used in propaganda. So a sign is one, that signifier, coupled with the signified, which is the intended meaning of that signifier. These signs are how we deal with everyday life. Like, we attach meaning to different words because that's what they are. So we know that the word dog is a small, very cute mammal who barks. And if we look at this in terms of propaganda, a symbol is a sign having a particular meaning for a different reactor. Two or more reactors may, of course, attach quite different meanings to the same symbol. And like we talked about, that's where dog whistles come in, because it can mean one thing to someone and another thing to someone else. One person will recognize that as a dog whistle and the other person is oblivious to it, and it's the exact same word or the exact same phrase. Thus, to Nazis, the swastika was a symbol of racial superiority. To some Asiatic and North American peoples, it is a symbol of universal peace and happiness. Here we're being reminded of the importance of context and how different things are used, different signs, different symbols are used in different settings. Propaganda and the media. Media are the means, the channels used to convey signs and symbols to the intended reader or reactor. So we have so much electronic media now on the internet. We've got different social media networks. lots of news is online, but of course then we have traditional media like printed newspapers, magazines and books. Both the internet and TV can convey a great many types of signs simultaneously. They can gain heavy impact from mutually reinforcing gestures, words, postures and sounds, and a background of symbolically significant leaders, celebrities, historical settings, architectures, flags, music, placards, maps. This is what we're talking about when we're saying that propaganda is deliberate. There are so many different elements that can go into creating a certain feeling, and those things are put together deliberately to make the viewer or the reactor, the reader, whatever kind of media it is, to make that person feel a certain way when they look at this piece of propaganda. During the Nazi period and during World War II and the subsequent Cold War, a great many researchers and writers were employed by governments, political movements and business firms to conduct propaganda. This is restating. This is a deliberate thing. It's literally people's jobs to create propaganda, media that is appealing to you. There are social scientists involved. There are psychologists involved. There are lots of different people who go into creating an attractive piece of propaganda that's going to appeal to a large group of people. And this is why you need to be aware of it, because it's probably going to sound very appealing to you. It's going to be something that you want to believe. There is a lot going on in terms of we have so much media at our disposal. With the internet, you could, if you wanted, spend literally the whole day just scrolling on Twitter, on various news sites, on Reddit. There is so much out there, and that can end up with an information overload. So because of selective attention, selective perception, and selective recall, propagandists know they can use those psychological biases to their advantage. We talked about denial in my You Have a Voice, Use It video, so that is a useful concept to revisit. If you want to check out that video, I will link it for you. And the links for videos I'm mentioning are all going to be in the description. Selective recall. This is not only paying attention to a selective thing like the selective perception, you're only paying attention to things that you already agree with. And this is already a psychological phenomenon where we're more likely to remember, for example, bad things as opposed to good things. So like if you have, let's take YouTube for example, 10 positive comments or 10 interested comments, people have watched the video and they're reacting to it and they're like, oh, good point, or I disagree with this, but this, they're respectful and they're engaging in good faith. You have 10 of those comments, but you've got one bad comment. That one bad comment is going to weigh a lot more than the 10 good comments. Even though there are 10 of them, the one bad one is probably going to stick in your mind and weigh a bit heavier than the weight of all of those 10 good things. Contemporary propagandists will try to find out what formative experiences and styles of education have predisposed their intended audiences to their current media preferences, and we're going to talk about the history that you're taught in school versus the history that you're not taught in school. These topics have thus become the subjects of vast amounts of commercial and academic research. People are paying a lot of attention to this stuff. You need to be aware of it as well. You will want to believe propaganda because it is designed to make you agree or designed to play off things that you already agree with. People, as a rule, attend to communications not because they want to learn something new or reconsider their own philosophies of life, but because they seek psychological reassurance about their existing beliefs and prejudices. We talked about the bystander effect in another video. People want to be part of the crowd. We want to belong, and that is, I guess, evolutionary speaking, vital, because you would not survive by yourself. You need other people. But that also means that you're vulnerable with propaganda because you can tend to want to go along with the crowd. I think on this point as well, there's something interesting to say about how social media algorithms are designed to funnel us further into whatever content we engage with. People talk about being in a bubble. If you do engage with certain content, you're given more of it. If you are, for example, a troll, you can then be constantly fed things that are going to fuel your outrage. I don't want to give a specific example because I want to keep this like benign and theoretical, but I feel like maybe we need a specific example. Let me try and think of a political issue that's not a massive firestorm. Let's take something like proportional representation. So in the UK, we have a first past the post system in terms of voting, and that can make a lot of people feel like their vote doesn't matter if they live in a safe seat. For example, my vote has not had much impact in a general election, although in local elections, it is really heartening to see that my vote can have an impact. But if we take an issue like proportional representation and say there's someone really vitriolic, like a troll online, who really believes that first past the post is the way to go, and again, I'm using a benign example, but fill in any big political issue, someone who's really dug in. You can think of plenty of examples. I just didn't want to use a really reactive example. This troll is for first past the post. If they are constantly commenting on these people that they disagree with, on people's posts who are talking about proportional representation, they're going to be fed more of that because the algorithm is like, oh, this person is constantly commenting on proportional representation posts. We need to give them more of that. And then this person who's very first past the post, likes things how they are, fill in the blanks of whatever political issue. The more they see those proportional representation posts, the more and more angry they're going to get. And it just fuels your outrage because you just get funneled down this rabbit hole of posts. The plain fact is that even the most skilled propagandist must usually content himself with a very modest goal, packaging a message in such a way that much of it is familiar and reassuring to the intended reactors, and only a little is so novel or true as to threaten them psychologically. As this is a consideration that propagandists have to keep in mind, it is also something that you should be aware of as you are going through the world, consuming media. You might very well want to believe something. It is designed that way. People, social scientists, psychologists, these people know how your brain works, how you work. They know how to design something that is not so far from the truth that you might believe it, or not so far from what you currently believe that you'll stretch to believe that as well. Propaganda that aims to induce major changes is certain to take great amounts of time, resources, patience, and indirection, except in times of revolutionary crisis when old beliefs have been shattered and new ones have not yet been provided. This is also why I tend to see links between things that are happening in the world that other people, will be talking about one political issue and I'll bring up something else and they're like, we're not talking about that. What are you doing? Why are you saying that? But to me, it's because you have to look at the wider context of things, and we're going to talk about history. And so this is why periods of crisis or times where things are changing a lot or there's a lot happening, I kind of get uneasy. It's because of this quote that we've just seen that can be used to quickly reshape public opinion. People are more willing to accept more extreme messages that in inter-crisis periods where everything is continuing as normal, there's no crisis, they wouldn't accept it then. Who is vulnerable to propaganda? We've covered this question already. Everyone! Everyone! Even if you're someone who thinks, I would never fall for that, or I'm very diligent. No, you still need to be on alert. This isn't to say it has to be a big deal, but just to have some awareness of what's happening. Unfortunately, average citizens who may be aware of being duped are not likely to have enough education, time, or economic means to defend themselves against the massive organizations of opinion managers and hidden persuaders. This is the thing. It is such a big enterprise to create propaganda that people are going to believe. There are so many people working on it, and it is a big project. How are you as an individual going to combat that? You don't have the same time or resources or reach that these big propagandists have. A complicated modern campaign on a major scale is likely to be planned most successfully by a collective leadership, a team of broadly educated and skilled people who have had both practical experience in public affairs and extensive training in history, psychology, and the social sciences. This is a deliberate and well put together enterprise. It may be important, therefore, to keep the planners behind the scenes and to keep intermediaries, frontmen, Trojan horses, whom the reactors are more likely to listen to and appreciate. This is a really interesting point that I can think of immediately. Two examples. There is the example of Paris Hilton knowing the role that the public and the media wanted her to play of this blonde, vapid party girl. Actually, that's not who she really is, but she played into that because she knew that that was how people perceived her. And another example that came to mind is from Adam Curtis's documentary/film, Hypernormalization. I have done a video about that surprisingly on my channel before, so I will link that video if you want to hear more about that film. I highly recommend you watch it. It's on BBC iPlayer. I think it's also on YouTube actually, so I will leave the YouTube link if you want to watch the full thing. It is amazing. In that, he talks about Libya and about the West, talks about how Colonel Gaddafi was playing a certain role for the world. And if you want to see the extent of that, I highly recommend you watch Hypernormalization. I was going to talk a bit about the psychology behind propaganda in terms of appealing to your ego. I did my dissertation on Russian literature, specifically Dostoevsky, from a psychoanalytical perspective. So Freud and the theory of the ego really interests me, but I think this video is getting way too long as is, so I will save that potentially for a future video. How do we counter propaganda? Actually, I think I might make this a whole separate video because the battery is running low and also this video is so long already.